Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you, and we have reached the point in APUSH history, and this is an APUSH video focusing in on topic 5.8. We have finally reached the time of the Civil War itself. Been a lot of buildup, a lot of preamble, a lot of things going on before the war itself, but now we are at the war. The South has seceded, Fort Sumter has been surrendered, and now Abraham Lincoln has the task of trying to reunite the country. The Civil War is going to be set up as a war of the North basically needing to invade the South to force the South back into the Union. And the South is trying to prevent that. So that's really the idea of the Civil War. It's not so much that the South is trying to conquer the North. It's the South trying to maintain its independence and Lincoln making a desire to invade the South by force to make the South stay in the Union. Now, we're going to get into a lot of the politics and economic and social aspects of the war in another series of videos, but these series of videos for topic 5.8 is taking a look at the military aspects of the Civil War. And if you are a person that likes to, look at battles and things like that, this is the series of videos for you. Now, we're not going to get into super big detail about it, but we're going to hit the major points, give you a little bit of in-depth understanding of it, but it's really going to give you just a nice survey of what's going to be happening in terms of what's going to happen on the battlefield in terms of its impact on the outcome of the war. But before we get into the actual specific battles themselves, we need to get into what I would kind of call from a boxing parlance, the tail of the tape. In other words, taking a look at how both the North and the South are going to be faring coming into this conflict. Because coming into this conflict, both the North and the South are going to have a number of key advantages, militarily speaking. If you're looking at the Confederacy, if you're looking at the South is going to have a major advantage in the sense that they are fighting on their home turf. This is going to be a defensive war for the Confederacy, which means they have a much better understanding of the lay of the land, where these battles are going to be fought. They don't have to travel as far to move soldiers and supplies. Also, as a team that is going to be on the defense, so to speak, in a war like this, you don't have to win quickly. The general understanding is that if you are the side that is being invaded, you don't have to outright defeat the invader. You just have to keep fighting until the invader gets tired, runs out of money, runs out of morale, or whatever. So the South has that going for them. Very similar to how the colonies had that going for them when they were fighting the Revolution against England. Now, in addition to that, we're going to be seeing the cream of the crop from West Point serving in the South's officer corps. People like Robert E. Lee and Longstreet and Jackson and a whole bunch of other guys. These are very, very, very well-decorated veterans of the West Point Military Academy. So the general sentiment was that the South had the better leaders, at least military leaders, the better officers. And this is going to prove true quite a bit, especially in the first half of the war. One of the things that Jefferson Davis didn't really have to worry about was finding a general that could lead Confederate forces. When he had Robert E. Lee, that's all that he really needed. Lincoln, on the other hand, is going to have one heck of a time going through a carousel of generals to try to find somebody. Eventually, it'll be Ulysses Grant, but it's going to take a number of years and a number of different attempts to try to find somebody that can effectively lead the Union Army. So the South certainly has that going for them. On the northern side, there's going to be some key advantages, including the fact that the North is going to have a lot more to draw from in terms of supplies, in terms of access to transportation, money, but if we're talking on the battlefield specifically, a much larger population to draw from to serve in the military. Remember, going into the war, the North represented about 60% of the total population for the United States. So, for every 4 soldiers, theoretically, that the Confederacy could enlist, the Union Army could enlist 6. And note, even though immigration is going to decline during the war, virtually all immigrants coming to the United States are coming in on the northern side. So there's going to be some help from that as well. So And this is going to also play a factor in some of the strategies that, for example, Ulysses Grant and Sherman will use during this war. The idea being is that it seemed like the Union Army had a limitless supply of soldiers to go through, so it meant that people like Grant and Sherman and other Union generals are not really going to be squeamish about losing lots of Union soldiers. Because there were plenty of replacements, whereas in the Confederacy, they couldn't draw on replacements nearly as easily. On top of that, you're going to be seeing the North have the better naval officer corps. The folks coming out of Annapolis. Farragut is going to be probably the most famous example of that. We're going to see some important naval advantages that are going to be a part of what's going to be becoming the Anaconda Plan, trying to defend the Atlantic, control the Mississippi, etc. So those are going to be some major advantages on each side. Now, getting into the economics here, as I was kind of alluding to a moment ago, the North had a tremendous economic advantage. Take a look at these stats right here. This is pretty amazing stuff. If you take a look at it, when the war starts, the northern half of the United States is going to have 85% of the nation's factories. That is an overwhelmingly massive advantage to be able to mass produce goods that you need to win a war. And we're talking about things like rifles and uniforms and food and all sorts of things, bullets, whatever, that the South just really can't draw on. So it's a major advantage. In terms of infrastructure, to be able to move men and supplies. Remember, the North had 3/4 of the railroad lines in this country. Now, granted, I know virtually none of the battles of the Civil War will be fought in the North, but, being able to move troops to the front, move them into the South, the North's going to be very easily able to do that. And even though, yes, the South doesn't have to move soldiers as far, we're going to find that the South is going to have a much more difficult time moving the soldiers that they do have, the limited amount of space or area they do have to move them, because they just don't have the infrastructure. They just don't have the railroad lines in place to do that. And 2/3 of the farms of the United States when the war starts are in the North as well. And keep in mind that, that 1/3 that's in the South, think about how many of those farms have invested solely in cotton. And cotton is very valuable, cotton is very profitable, but it's not very edible. So if you're talking about having access, to wheat and corn and soybeans and other things that you need to eat to survive as a fighting force, it's the northern farms that had that, not so much the southern farms. Now, that's not to say that the South had nothing going for them. Remember, the South had plenty of money in the form of cotton production. And going into this war, the South felt very confident that the world still needed Southern cotton. And the concern being is that if the South is crushed, if slavery is abolished, then the cotton industry will collapse, and then the world will lose its cheap cotton. And so there's a sense amongst Southern leaders that because of this potential nightmare scenario globally in terms of the demand of cotton, that European powers will be much more likely to help them as opposed to the Union Army in the North. Unfortunately, the South is going to gamble on this, and they're going to lose. We will find later on that, for example, India is going to be a very, very nice place to grow cotton as far as England is concerned. And basically the South is going to find out that Southern cotton is not nearly as much in demand as they thought, that the South did not have nearly a monopoly on cotton production as they thought. Another couple of things that are going to prove vital in the outcome of this war will be the political differences hanging on or existing between the North and the South. Now, when we talk about the North and the federal government, we know, of course, that Abraham Lincoln's going to be serving as president, leading from the White House. But think about what Lincoln's going to be able to do in terms of being able to take action in this war on many different levels. One of the things that had been, kind of a stymieing thing for Republicans and previous to them Whigs was that, Southern Democrats kind of gummed up the works in terms of getting things done that they wanted legislatively. Things like raising tariffs, things like investing in rail lines and stuff like that. Well, now the South is gone. So, basically the federal government is a one-party system for the most part during this war. And so Lincoln and the Republicans are going to be able to get done a lot of stuff that they want to get done because there's no Southern opposition in Congress. But on top of that, we're going to see Lincoln, as a president himself, be willing to use extraordinary power, and you could argue unconstitutional power, to be able to win the war. Lincoln's ability to relate to the average American in the North and be able to rally his cabinet and almost bend Congress to his will on many occasions is going to show the amazing ability and talents of Abraham Lincoln at this critical time. On the other side, Jefferson Davis, not so effective. Jefferson Davis is going to be having to basically herd cats through the course of this war. Because unlike the federal government in the North, the South has a confederacy, a confederal government, where the national government is by design very weak, and that the states have individual ultimate sovereignty over what's going to be going on. So Jefferson Davis is going to be asking and pleading more than leading during this conflict. And as things go worse for the South as the war drags on, it only becomes harder and harder for Jefferson Davis to be able to have the ability to get things done that he needs to. And Jefferson Davis didn't quite have the same level of respect as Lincoln did and whatnot. So very different political leaders are going to be playing a role in the outcome of this. And just keep in mind that, because of that confederal style government, it really will be a disorganized mess in trying to fight this war. Yes, Robert E. Lee is the lead general, but he leads the Army of Virginia, and he's kind of doing his thing at the end of the day. And various other generals are kind of doing their thing across the South. So there isn't this big overarching military plan, unlike what's going to be happening with the Union Army over time. And as the South starts to suffer some defeats, by 1862 into 1863, then what happens is that the South has less and less money, fewer and fewer resources to be able to actually do anything to try to actually, continue to fight the war. At the end of the day, spoiler alert, the North is going to win this in part because they just grind the South into nothing. That the South will basically lose this war out of attrition. They will just run out of money. They will run out of supplies. They will run out of men. They just are not going to be able to financially win this thing. And so what's kind of interesting is that, as I said a moment ago, usually the invaded side has the advantage of dragging out the war to their advantage. But as we'll see in this conflict, it's actually going to be in reverse. Because of the vast resources that are going to be at the disposal of the Northern Union Army, it actually is going to prove that as the war drags on, it's actually going to be more beneficial to the North as compared to the South, which is going to have very limited resources at the end of the day. So very interesting to consider. So we're going to leave it there for right now. When we pick it up next time, we're going to actually get into the first battles, like Bull's Run, the Peninsular Campaign, etc., etc. So one last little, overview, a little preview before we actually get to, men on the ground, so to speak. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.